طبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد ثم الصلاة والسلام على آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المظلومين واللعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من يوم عداوتهم إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه وهو أصدق القائلين: إن الله اشترى من المؤمنين أنفسهم وأموالهم بأن لهم الجنة يقاتلون في سبيل الله فيقتلون ويقتلون وعدا عليه حقا في التوراة والإنجيل والقرآن ومن أوفى بعهده من الله فاستبشروا ببيعكم الذي بايعتم به وذلك هو الفوز العظيم. صلوات على محمد وعلى محمد. Tonight is the third night in the continuation of our series on obstacles to knowing God. And tonight we also mark the wafat and shahada of the daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen, Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And before we speak of this eminent and illustrious member of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, we wish to continue with our series first so that we are able to cover enough ground to make a conclusion tomorrow night, inshallah. The verse of the Quran that is the basis and the theme of our discussion is Surah At-Tawbah, chapter 9 of the Quran, verse 111, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Indeed, Allah has purchased from the believers their lives and their possessions. And because they have given everything to Allah, in exchange, He has promised them paradise. He has promised them Jannah. So they fight in the way of God. Sometimes they are killed and sometimes they kill. This is a promise that Allah has taken and made it binding upon His own self in the Torah and in the Injil and in the Quran. Who then is more true to His promise and true to His covenant than Allah? Therefore, O you who believe, rejoice in the bargain that you have made with Allah, for indeed this is a mighty achievement." Now, last night we stopped after looking at an analogy that was offered to us by the famous Shia scholar and mystic Mullah Sadra, in which he compares the heart of a true believer to that of a mirror that reflects the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the degree and capacity that is possible for humans to do so. And we looked at specifically 5 reasons that he offered why sometimes, even though a precious object may be placed in front of a mirror, it may fail to show its brilliance and its light. Now, before we continue talking a little bit more about that mirror, it is important to also mention that sometimes the true beauty of a thing is not shown unless it is reflected on another surface. Because you will recall that out of the 5 different obstacles to showing that precious object in the mirror, the last one was a situation where the mirror is complete, the mirror is polished, there is no rust on it, there is no veil between the mirror and the precious object. And the mirror is not distracted from that precious object. It is very much in search of the precious object, but one does not know where to look. And from that basis we said that it is important for one to look for knowledge from the right sources, such as from Rasulullah and the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, so that one is able to find this precious object. But this may raise a question to say, why do I need a mirror? Why don't I just look at the object directly? Which is why we are saying that sometimes an object may have another dimension of beauty to it that is not shown unless it is reflected through some other surface. Such as, for example, something may be pure white light, and that is beautiful. But if you let it pass through a prism, it will split and show you multiple colors, isn't it? And it is from that that you get a rainbow, for example. So sometimes you need the mist, or you need the haze, or you need that prism that will take that original beauty and light and then split it and bring out other colors and other forms of beauty from it. In the same way, sometimes you may place a diamond before you, but you might not see its brilliance. But when you place it in front of a mirror, through the reflection of the mirror, you might see other forms of beauty from it. And it is in this sense that the human's heart acts as a mirror, because Allah has all those beautiful attributes within him, but they are latent in him. In creating this being, in creating this ashraful makhluqat, in creating this human being, Allah now seeks to bring out that multiplicity from His unity. He seeks to bring out all those beautiful asma of His individually in different ways and in different forms, so that it may show its brilliance and its color and reflect back to Him. So it is in this sense then that we also talk of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam as being the perfect mirrors and the perfect images who reflect these attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because obviously the more perfect a person is, or the more pure his heart is, the more brilliantly he will reflect that back, because there is less tarnish on that mirror. So if Allah wished to show some of His attributes or all of His attributes in their most brilliant form, He would need a heart that is absolutely pure, that is as pure as it can be. And that would therefore then come from Muhammad and Ali Muhammad salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so when we read certain traditions and ahadith from the Aimma alayhimus salam, at face value they may be hard to explain, but if you look at them from this perspective, then they begin to make sense. Such as, for example, when you see traditions where the Imams say, Nahnu asma'ullahi al-husna, we are the beautiful names of Allah. Or we are the greatest names of Allah. So what does an Imam mean when he says we are the beautiful names of Allah? In other words, they manifest those attributes. They are not saying that we are Allah. They are saying that if you want to understand those attributes of Allah in their purest sense, if you want to see them manifesting themselves in brilliance, then look at us. Because we show those. So it is in those lights, in that context, that we understand such traditions. Now, there is another matter that we need to clarify from yesterday's discussion as well. On the first night, we said that the greatest obstacle to knowing Allah was self-will. Last night, we mentioned 5 different matters that Mullah Sadra introduced to us. He said that the essence of a person might be deficient, so that he is not able to understand Allah. That might be an obstacle. Or there may be sins committed because of which they act like rust upon the heart of a person, and that becomes an obstacle to knowing Allah. Or the person might be occupied with other matters, such as his worldly affairs, because of which his heart is turned away, and the precious objects, Allah, is behind him, so that he does not reflect those attributes in him. Or we said that a person might have a veil between him and Allah, which is based on some ideas that he picked from a child, from his childhood, and he holds on to those ideas, unwilling to re-look at them or to learn anew. And that holding on to preconceived false ideas that you take from childhood, and they're frozen in a person's heart, that we said the map that we build and we are afraid to let go of, that becomes a veil between. So that could be an obstacle. And then we said finally that a person might have all the sincerity and all the intentions and all the exertion in searching for Allah, and there may not be a veil, but he may not know where to look for that. So that could become an obstacle. Now the point that we wish to clarify tonight is that even though these are separate obstacles, their root is the same thing, the self-will and the ego. If you remember the example we gave on the first night, we said that if we run after the little gods that occupy us from Allah, such as the wealth and the status and the relationships and the fame and the money, then these gods stop us from knowing the real God. But we also said that if you only fight these things, if you only fight desires, if you only fight your obsession with fame or with relationships or with money or with status, then you are simply cutting at the twigs, whereas the root has not been removed, and that is the self-will and the ego. So if we now try to present a picture of the whole thing, then what we are trying to say is that the root of this tree that stands as an obstacle between us and realizing our connectedness to Allah, the root is the self-will and the ego. The branches from these are those 5 things that we talked about yesterday, such as sin and disobedience and the rust on the heart and being occupied with the world and not having the essence to understand certain truths and so on. From these branches then emerge certain twigs, because it is in humans' nature to search for God. A human being is wired such that he will always seek his origin, he will always seek his creator. And in doing so, one mistakenly then begins looking for peace and tranquility from places other than Allah. One starts looking for peace and tranquility from pleasure, from money, from travel, from games, from obsessions of other sorts. In reality, that human being is searching for Allah. But the search is misplaced. There is not a soul except that it is constantly in search of Allah. It is struggling to find its Lord. But it is misplaced because of these other reasons. So those little gods act as the twigs, and they come from those branches, but the root is the self-will and the ego. Now we can explain this again by re-looking at those 5 reasons and see how ultimately the source is the ego and the self-will. The first reason we said was that there may be a deficiency in a person's essence, so that that person is unable to understand Allah. Not understand mentally or rationally, but to realize with one's entire being. We said this could happen in the case of children, or people who simply lack the ability to comprehend things at a deeper level. But we said this deficiency, or this mirror that was never formed to perfection, could have also been caused in an individual who was raised all his life or her life without any understanding of God or religion or spirituality. So that essence is deficient itself. Now, this raising without religion, this raising without spirituality, it came from somebody who was driven by the ego or by self-will. So you see that the root cause is that self-will or the ego. If you look at the second reason, which was that tarnish and that corruptness and that sin and the disobedience that impairs the mirror from its ability to reflect the attributes of Allah, that sin and disobedience as well comes from the ego and self-will, isn't it? It is only when I have this, I want something, even though Allah does not want it, or I choose to disobey because there is a God I worship, which is that ego, that in this matter I know more than Allah. Na'udhu billah. So sin and disobedience is also in a sense a worship of that self-will and that ego. So yes, that tarnish and that rust is an obstacle to knowing God, but its root is still the same thing. In other words, the greatest obstacle remains self-will, and we'll talk about what we mean by self-will. The third reason we said was a person is occupied with the world and not seeking Allah. This was the case of the precious object behind the mirror. Again, when does one get occupied with the world and forget the remembrance of his Creator? It is again the ego, the self-will. That is why Allah calls out to His creatures with love. Ya ayyuhal insan, ma gharraka bi rabbikal kareem. O insan, what is it that has turned you away from your gracious Lord? What is it that has turned you away from your kind Lord? What is it that has distracted you from your Lord, who loves to you so much and comes to you, runs towards you, but you turn away from Him? It is that same ego and the will that causes this turning away and being occupied with the world. The fourth reason that we gave was that one has these beliefs and false ideas that one holds on to. Again, it is the ego that is afraid of letting go, because it fears, if I let go of these, I shrink, I diminish, I cease to be, I face extinction, I die. And because of that, it holds on to that, and then that becomes the obstacle to knowing Allah. So yes, it is an obstacle, but the root is the same. And if this doesn't make sense, then of course you need to go back and listen to the lectures on the end of negative suffering, where we talked about the formation of the ego and all these ideas of not letting go and making in fear of diminishment. The fifth and the final reason was ignorance of the direction where to seek the truth. And again, it is because of this ego. Otherwise, if we had surrendered to Allah, if there was no self-will, then automatically we would know where to find the truth. Automatically Allah would take control, or He is in control, but there would be no resistance to what is, and then we would know what we are meant to know. So that ignorance in part is also that refusal to surrender. So in summary then, what we're saying is that there are many, many different obstacles that we can talk about. And we could go on and on and on and raise different issues. And you can come up with issues and say, well, this could be an obstacle as well, that could be an obstacle. But it will always come back to that same issue of that refusal to surrender to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you can recite a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Now, a question that I have been asked based on these last few nights is, what do you mean when you say self-will? You keep saying self-will is the greatest obstacle to knowing God. You keep saying this self-will comes from the ego. What is self-will? Before I explain self-will in the context that I understand it, and it is just an opinion, and you are welcome to expand upon that and look at it from your perspective, I tried looking at first what the dictionary says what self-will is. And it was interesting that it is not very far from what we are understanding self-will to be. From a dictionary's definition, self-will is willfulness, especially in satisfying one's own desires or adhering to one's own opinions, which in a sense stands in opposition to Allah's will and Allah's opinion. If you look at a thesaurus on the understanding of self-will, there are many different definitions. Some are positive, some are negative. In a positive sense, it can mean being resolute and determined. But in the negative sense that we are discussing it, self-will is obstinacy, stubbornness. It says to be pig-headed, refusing to repent, insisting on controlling one's own behavior. This is a thesaurus definition. There is even spirituality in a thesaurus. So in other words, when I say that religion, God, Allah, Quran, Ahlul Bayt, they have to fit my definition and my understanding of what I think God should be, what I think Ahlul Bayt should be, what I think the Quran is, what I think Islam is, then that is self-will. As opposed to this is when I come to it with humility and say, I have no opinion. Open the Quran. What does the Quran say? What the Quran says, I submit. And this has to be a journey of a lifetime. There should never be a point in life where, yes, we stay with conviction. And if we are sincere, that conviction and faith will remain. But there should not be a point in life where we say, now I have found the truth and there is nothing else for me to know. And my belief system is perfect. It cannot be challenged or questioned. So, in relation to this question, what do you mean by self-will? An example of this would be to say, well, I am human. I sometimes have a desire. I have a self-will to purchase a home. Is that wrong? Should I wait until Allah reveals to me, oh, so-and-so, purchase a home? Because that is the will of Allah. It is a desire I have. Now, is that self-will? Is it wrong for me to have that desire to purchase a home? The answer, as expected, is it depends. It is neither yes or no. If you ask me, is it wrong for me to will and desire I want to purchase a home? My answer would be, well, tell me first, why do you want to purchase a home? This is just an example. You can think of other. I want to start a relationship. I want to start a business. I want to do this. I want to do that. I want to eat. I want to drink. I want to sleep. Whatever. Is it wrong for me to do this? The answer is, the first question is, separate the thought and the action from the real intention. What is your intention when you say, I want to purchase a home? If the intention is to show off so that the whole neighborhood knows how big a mansion I have, then of course it is wrong. That will stand in serving the ego and an obstacle to coming close to Allah. If the intention is so that I have greater facilities to indulge in more worldly pleasures, then of course it is wrong. If the intention of purchasing the home is because it gives me a sense of comfort and security and permanence, then again it is wrong. Because a believer, first of all, a believer should never feel permanent in this world. A believer has to live a life where he does not even expect to live tomorrow. In a true state of Iman, one should not even leave this mosque assuming you're coming tomorrow night to the mosque. That is the true state of Iman, isn't it? So the idea of permanence should not even occur to the heart of a believer. But if one seeks security and comfort and a sense of assurance from that home, then it is wrong, because a believer should only take his sense of security from Allah. But the same matter if one was to say, I intend or I wish to purchase a home so that my family may have shelter, then that is not only okay, but that is noble, that is good. So that when I die, my children are not homeless, they have a shelter over their heads. Or so that because if I'm paying rent, I'm throwing money to waste, by purchasing a home, I can save money, which I could then use for other good purposes. Then it is an act of nobility. Now that same purchase of the home, because I am thinking of the children, and I'm thinking of the family, and I'm thinking of the community, and I'm thinking of the good that will happen out of this, I will hold majlises of Imam Hussein in my house, I will do this and that in my house. Now, it is a source of reward, because now that mirror is getting polished. Now, a certain attribute of Allah is reflecting through that action. What attribute? The attribute of love. Because that love that you are showing to your children, you are incapable of showing love. You have seen in your own experiences as you have grown up as a human being. There have been moments when you have shown flashes of anger, flashes of lust that have even surprised and amazed you, hasn't it? You have thought, I did not know I was capable of such greed, or such meanness, or such anger, or such losing of control, or such lust, for example. You then realize that it is by the grace of Allah that if there is any goodness or piety in you, it is not from you yourself. Therefore, when you show love to your family, it is Allah who is reflecting love and mercy through you. You are just the mirror, just the means. So self-will is not really when you intend to do something or the action. It is really the intention behind the action or behind the thought. In a similar vein then, if someone was to say, if I have the self-will to save some money, is it wrong? The same arguments would come into place. Why? If you are saving money so that your children have something to lean on and support themselves after you're gone, so that they can lead a peaceful life and be able to attend to matters of the hereafter and not be occupied with the world because they don't have a means to provide for themselves, then it is a good thing. If you are saving so that that money can then help in the service of Islam, in the service of helping orphans and poor, then it is a good thing. But if it is an obsession and there is no limit to how much I want to hoard, because it gives me a sense of security and peace, and when there is a recession or when there is fear of losing that money, it shakes my sense of security and it makes me worried what I will eat tomorrow, then it is bad. Because now my sense of permanence and security and peace, instead of coming from Allah, it is coming from wealth. So it is not what you intend in terms of your action or your thoughts, but it is the intention behind that that you might think of self-will. So another way of saying this is, or to put it differently, the reason why it is so difficult for me to define self-will to you is because there are grades and levels of self-will. At a minimum, at an absolute minimum, self-will would be to do everything only for the sake of Allah. So you have an awareness of self, there is an I-ness present in you, but everything you do is only for the sake of Allah. When I say everything, it doesn't mean buying a home or investing or starting a business. I mean even walking, eating, drinking, sleeping, breathing is for the sake of Allah. And there are books that ulama have written on how you make such intention. For example, when you eat, your intention is that you may gain strength to worship Allah. You will still enjoy the food. You will still get the energy from that food. But now you are rewarded for eating. Whereas somebody else sitting beside you is eating the same food, getting the same pleasure, but there is no reward. Because the intention is different. And I've given this example time and time again of the man who built a home and invited Imam Ja'far al-Sadiq salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi to his home. And the Imam saw a window and said, why did you build this window in this room? And the man said, so that I can get sunlight and fresh air and breeze. And the Imam said, you lost an opportunity for infinite reward. If you would have said, I put this window so that I can hear adhan from the mosque nearby, you would still have got the sunlight, you would still have got the breeze, but now you would have got reward for that. So these things cannot be made up. These things come when we are focused on Allah. When we do everything for the sake of Allah, then I don't have to list for you what should your intention be when you sleep, when you walk, when you drink. You will find that means, whether you set out to earn a living, whether you are walking, whether you are talking, right to whether you are blinking or opening the door or closing the door. You will find that everything you do is only and only for the sake of Allah. This is at the absolute minimum. When we do something only for the sake of Allah, then automatically those actions that cannot be done for the sake of Allah will fall out. For example, wasting time. Nobody will ever say, I am wasting time qurbatan ilallah. Or this waste of time is only for the pleasure of Allah. It does not make sense. Anybody who has even half a common sense and sincerity will know. So automatically now, if everything I do is only for the sake of Allah, then I will not waste time. Or committing sins. No one will commit a sin and say, this sin I'm committing only for the pleasure of Allah. It doesn't make any sense. So now if everything I do is only for Allah, then there is no way I will commit a sin. Because when I'm committing that action, I will realize it is my habit and practice that everything I do is only for the sake of Allah. How will this be only for the sake of Allah? And that slowly then takes us to a higher level, where not only is it done for Allah, but the self-will begins to fade. The sense of I-ness begins to fade. And then at the highest level, when we say self-will as an obstacle, there is absolutely no consciousness of one's own self. And one becomes like a dead body in the hands of the one washing him. One becomes in the hands of Allah like a dead body in the hands of the one washing him, so that he turns the body as he pleases without any resistance. Or one becomes to Allah like a small ball is at the foot of a child. The child throws it where it wants, and the ball has no opinion of its own, that no, you're kicking me this way, but I want to go there. There is absolutely no resistance. There is absolute surrender to Allah. This is at its maximum level. At its minimum level, where we start, is to say that everything we do has to be only for the sake of Allah. Sometimes a person might do something, it might appear to be religious, but it may be in the service of the ego. It might not be for Allah. One might volunteer at the mosque. It may appear as if it is for Allah, but it might not be for Allah. And sometimes a person might do something that at face value does not appear to be a religious act, but it might be for the sake of Allah. For example, a person might play with a child. A person might go on a picnic with his family. But they are doing it out of love. And through that act, Allah is showing and manifesting His love to that child, who is His creature as well, and you are the means through which that love is being manifested. That is why, when a man saw Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Allahumma salli ala wa ali Muhammad, he saw him kissing his grandsons, Al-Hasan wa Al-Husayn. He was holding them, hugging them, kissing them. He loved his grandsons. And the Muslims knew this. So there was a man sitting nearby. Proudly he said to the Messenger of Allah, do you know, until this day I have never kissed my child. Rasulullah said to others who were around them, if you want to see a man of the fire of hell in this world, look at this man. Why? Because he has absolutely lost the ability to reflect one of the greatest attributes of Allah, which is love. But it is important to remember that when you show love, do not feel good in yourself that you have shown love. You do not have the ability to show love. Everything you show, whether it's love for your child, whether it's love for Ahlul Bayt, it is a blessing of Allah. He allows that degree of your faith to flow through you onto others. And He makes that a means by which you can know Him. So, it is difficult to judge an action at face value. You cannot look at an action and say, this is for Allah, this is not for Allah. It will depend on the sincerity and the intention of the person. Even though we cannot judge people's actions and say, is this for Allah or is this for the ego, there are one or two ways by which we have some hint or some indication. One way by which we may get a hint of this is the fact that when a person has surrendered to Allah, they are usually focused on the hereafter. you will find that they are more preoccupied with the hereafter than they are with this world. The other quality that you will find in them is sincerity. Now I wish to talk about this very quickly. The first thing, which was that focus on the hereafter. We have said the path to enlightenment is clear. We know that the obstacle that stands between us and knowing Allah, not knowing with the mind, but realizing our dependency and our connectedness to Allah, is the ego and the self-will. When this self-will is removed and realization of Allah is attained, that realization does not happen in the mind. It is not like a formula. It isn't something like a theory or a conclusion or a proof that you rest in your brain. Rather, it encompasses the whole body. It brings about a level of certitude and conviction that rests in the heart and permeates the whole body to a point that sometimes it manifests itself in a person's physical actions. And because of this realization of how Allah is totally in control and how we are completely dependent on Him, a person's actions now become God-conscious actions. A person is now driven by being focused on Allah. And because of that, one's worldview or one's perspective on life is permanently altered. How you view everything in life, whether it is the media, whether it is relationships, whether it is wealth, whether it is community, that is permanently altered when you see how Allah plays an active role in the whole process. So once that happens, one is constantly now thinking of Allah in every action, and when you think of Allah, you automatically think of the hereafter, because that is what Allah invites us to, that is real life, that is what is permanent, whereas the life of this world is temporary. So you can see sometimes when a person is more focused on the hereafter, that gives you a hint that this person's actions are being done for the sake of Allah. Or this person is on his way to surrendering completely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so today, when we think of anything, whether it is a career move, whether it is moving to a new home, whether it is traveling to a new land, whether it is moving to another country, whether it is starting a new relationship, whatever it is, what are the kind of questions that come to our mind? Do the questions stop at saying, how much money will I make if I go into this investment? What is in it for me? Will this make me happy? How does this align with my retirement plans? Or do those thoughts also extend beyond death, beyond those retirement plans, to say, how does this affect my hereafter? And that is why we have a beautiful hadith from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Muhammad. He says, إِذَا أَرَدْتَ أَن تَفْعَلَ أَمْرًا فَتَدَبَّرْ عَاقِبَتَهُ. When you intend to take up any action, when you intend to do anything, then reflect on its final outcome. Anything you touch in life, anything you want to do, the first thought that should come to you is, what is the final outcome of this? Now we all do that. The problem is that those who are not focused in the hereafter, the final outcome they reflect on does not cross the bridge of death. What happens is, I want to do this action, what is the result tomorrow? What is the outcome and the profit after 5 years? What will I get from this after 10 years? How does this affect me when I'm 70 years old? It stops at that. Whereas when the Prophet is saying, فَتَدَبَّرْ عَاقِبَتَهُ, he's talking of aqibah as in the hereafter. That when you do something, think, how is this affecting me on the day of judgment? How is this affecting me when I'm raised from my grave? And so when one is driven by that mode of thinking, then automatically one is on one's way towards surrendering towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The other thing we said was sincerity. And sincerity, we said, shows itself in many ways. The foremost ways in which it shows itself is when we do something that is not compulsory on us. If you pray 5 times a day, you may be doing it out of the fear of the fire of hell. Or maybe not. We don't know. But when you say, I wish to volunteer at the madrasa, or I wish to volunteer at the community, or I wish to help at the mosque, then that is an act of selflessness. That is an act that you didn't have to do. But we can also tell from those actions whether it was done for Allah or for the ego. If it is being done only for Allah, then the issues that may come up between us and other human beings will not stop us from doing those actions. In other words, if I come to the mosque and I say I wish to volunteer, and then somebody says something to me and it upsets me, it won't stop me from volunteering. It won't say to me that, well, fine, now I'm not coming to the mosque anymore. Or because somebody said something to my wife and she was volunteering, so now I'm not coming to the mosque. Now when I give these examples, please do not think, oh, he is talking about me or he's talking about so-and-so. This is a problem that plagues every community across the world. Khoja, non-Khoja, Shia, Sunni, any mosque you go to, this is an issue. As long as we cannot find in ourselves this single-mindedness to say, I am working for Allah, not for fame, not for position, not for acknowledgement. I do not need to be thanked. I do not need to be acknowledged. It is only and only for Allah. Then that is true qurbatan ilallah. That is true only for the sake of Allah. That is a true example where the ego is being diminished and there is a surrender towards Allah. And that is why it is important that what we do should not only be good, but should also be only for the sake of Allah. Now when we do something for the sake of Allah, as we said, there is an element of surrender that increases us in our knowledge of Allah. Keeping in mind knowledge, quote-unquote knowledge, is realization of how we are dependent and connected to Him. Although we will talk about knowledge at greater length tomorrow, inshallah. So, in this world, we sow through actions. In the hereafter, we reap the rewards in Jannah, which are the fruits of those actions. It is the same actions which take a physical form and come to us in Jannah. In both cases, what increases is our quote-unquote knowledge of Allah. And this will become more clear when we talk about knowledge tomorrow, inshallah. When we work sincerely for Allah, because we are doing it only for Allah and the ego is removed, that increases our connection to Allah, and therefore that increases our knowledge of Allah. In the hereafter, when we indulge in the pleasures of Jannah, as we indulge in them, it will increase our knowledge of Allah. Now tomorrow, if time permits, because I have more material I wanted to cover tonight, which doesn't seem like I will, if time permits tomorrow night, inshallah, I will explain this in more detail, how in Jannah, as you indulge in pleasure, it increases your knowledge of Allah. So, you begin to see that Allah's plan for the human being was this and this only. The purpose of a human being's existence is to know Allah, is to come as close as possible to Allah. Coming close to Allah in what sense? Not coming close to Allah in the sense of distance, because Allah is not at a fixed location. It is not a spatial matter. It is not that Allah is 1,000 miles away and then you come close to Him and then now you are 900 miles away from Him. So when we say coming close to Allah, in what sense? In the sense of realization. Realization of what? Is it in the sense of becoming more connected to Allah? No, you are already connected to Allah. You are so connected to Him that He says you are closer to Him than your jugular vein. Min hablil warid, wa nahnu aqrabu ilayhi min hablil. So He is already closer to you than your jugular vein. So neither is Allah at a fixed position that when you say we come close to Allah, you can journey towards Him in the physical sense. Nor is it that you can become more connected to Allah than you already are. What stands in the way is the illusion that I am not connected to Allah. So whenever we say coming close to Allah, increasing in our knowledge of Allah, either by acting in this world or indulging in pleasure in the hereafter, what we mean is the stripping away of that sense of separation from Allah, that illusion, so that one begins to realize how close one is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you can recite as-salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There are a few points I have to make very quickly so that I wrap up the subjects logically tonight before we come to Masaib. And one of these points is that Allah does not want us to do good only for the sake of the good. Because this is a thing that confuses many people. Oh, look, and so is not even a Muslim, but is giving millions of dollars towards this foundation and this charity, and so did so much, and what are we doing as Muslims? Allah values things only if they are done for Him. Allah does not want you to feed orphans only for the sake of feeding orphans. Allah does not want you to build a mosque only for the sake of building a mosque, or to build wells for the sake of building a well. Why? Firstly, because Allah does not need you or me to do that. We would have to be arrogant to think that Allah needs me or my money to be able to help any humanitarian cause. Secondly, Allah does not need to allow any of His creatures to suffer so that I can have a purpose in life. Someone does not have to become an orphan so that I can do something good so I go to Jannah. It would have to be extremely mean and selfish of me to think that someone has to suffer and become an orphan so that I have a purpose in life. Which means what then? Which means that Allah, by asking us to carry out deeds of nobility or humanitarian acts or good deeds, He is simply offering us an opportunity to get to know Him better. These are simply platforms. They are simply excuses. Allah could fix it in the blink of an eye, isn't it? It is only kun fayakun for Him. Everybody will be rich. Nobody will suffer from any pain. But He allows this cause and effect to take place, even though a lot of the evil that you see is not caused by Him, it is caused by human beings. But He allows them to subsist and then allows us to come forward and take advantage of these opportunities. Why? Not so that we may get this thawab or that thawab. He can give it to us without that. But so that we may increase in our knowledge of Allah. And that increase in knowledge will only happen if it is being done only for the sake of Allah. Which brings us back to the same thing, that act of nobility has only got value if it is being done khalisatan liwajhillah. If it is being done only qurbatan ilallah. And therefore, to stop at this point then, for tonight, we say that when we talk of self-will, at the absolute minimum, we are talking about, when we say self-will is an obstacle to knowing Allah, at a minimum we are saying any acts that is being done and the intention is not only for the sake of Allah, then that is the self-will that stands as an obstacle to knowing Allah, because that stops us from growing in our relationship with Allah. That stops us from removing that illusion, that stops us from realizing how connected we are to Allah. That is at the minimum. And then at the highest level, the self-will that is an obstacle to knowing Allah is even that sense of I. And tomorrow, inshallah, we will give ahadith and examples to prove how that is an obstacle, even that consciousness of my own existence, besides the existence of Allah. Not that I cease to exist physically, but that I-ness, that ego that is produced by the mind. And we will see as well from examples of the Aimma alayhi salam how their actions prove that they were working completely surrendered to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Tonight, my dear brothers and sisters, we have gathered to remember Sayyidah Zainab alayha salam, the daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and Sayyidah Fatima alayha salam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. She is a lady who is very eminent to the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, not only to the Prophet who named her, not only Imam Ali alayhi salam, after whom she is named Zainab, the adornment of her father, but right down to the last Imam. We have narrations of ulama who have had visions and dreams. In one vision, one man says he saw the Imam of our time, Sahibul Zaman, Ajjalallahu ta'ala farajahu sharif, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. He says, I saw the Imam and he looked very sad, very sorrowful. He was grieving. And I said to him, Mawla, why is it that you look so sad? What is it that grieves you so much? He said, do you not know today is the day that my aunt Zainab alayhi salam passed away? That is why I am so much in grief. Do you not know, O so and so, that on the day of her passing away, the malaika in the heavens get together for her majlis? And they recite her khutbah that she recited in the darbar of Kufa, and they cry. You can see the importance of her role in Islam and how she played this pivotal role in saving Imama, in saving, and I will talk about that tomorrow night inshallah in the Masaib as well, how she saved Imama really. Without her, the Imamat would have disappeared really. And therefore she plays this very important role. Her Masaib is largely focused on the day of Ashura in Karbala and the tragedy of Karbala and what happens after that. As far as her passing away is concerned, there is a lot of mystery, unfortunately, as to how she passed away, where she passed away. Until this day, I was in Damascus a few months ago, speaking to ulama, purchasing books on her life. There is still debates. Is she buried in Damascus? Is she buried in Egypt? Is she buried in Medina? How did she pass away? There is the one incident last year, on the same day, I had the fortune of reciting the same majlis here at Masumin Islamic Center, and I mentioned that there is the incident that she had traveled to Damascus with her husband, Abdullah bin Ja'far, and this was because of a drought, and a farmer had injured her, and then he donated the land where she passed away, and that is where she is buried. There are other incidents that say, no, this is not the real incident, this is not the real story. There is another narration given to say that after she went back to Medina, she made it her life's mission to propagate what happened to her brother. And she spoke so openly against Yazid that the governor of Medina could not tolerate her presence in Medina. And he wrote to Yazid la'natullah alayh and said to him that she is causing problems for me in Medina. You must remove her to Medina. And this is where the narrations then divide. Some say that Yazid had her sent to Egypt. And there she began speaking about Imam Hussein alayhi salam until she passed away. Others say that even in Egypt, the governor in Egypt complained. So Yazid had her brought to Damascus then. And that is where she passed away. Most narrations say she passed away on the 15th of Rajab, 62 AH, which would be 1 full year after, or 1.5 years after the tragedy of Karbala. So after the release from the prison, she would have lived for only 6 months. 6 months to 2 years is the maximum amount of time this lady carried that sorrow and grief of Karbala with her. There is also a narration I should mention that I have read in books to say that she did not die a natural death, but she was poisoned by Yazid as well. In any case, Allah knows best what was the cause of her passing away. But it does not change her role, nor does it change the importance of what she did to contribute to Islam. There are two qualities in this lady that I wish to share with you tonight, inshallah, to show you lessons that we can learn from a being who has surrendered to Allah. The first thing that we see in her is that no matter how much she suffered, she never gave the enemy the satisfaction of seeing her crying and weak in front of them. She always showed herself as being strong in front of the enemy. And then the other quality which stands completely in opposition to that is the quality by which she is known Ummul Masa'ib. Why is she called Ummul Masa'ib, the mother of suffering and afflictions? It is because of her capacity to take suffering, not just her own suffering, but I will give you examples to show you how she could take suffering from other people and hold it in her heart for them. This was the expansiveness of this lady, how much she could take in terms of bala and masa'ib. It is no small title that she is her mother despite all the suffering. It is Zainab who is called Ummul Masa'ib. But I give you first a few examples to show you how strong she was in the face of the enemy. One clear example, of course, is in the darbars of Kufa and Sham. We see in Kufa that at the time when she is brought in front of Ibn Ziyad, la'natullah alayh, and Ibn Ziyad asks, who is this lady? And somebody introduces her and says, this is Zainab bint Ali. He comes towards her and he says to her, Alhamdulillahi alladhi fadhakum ahlal bayt. All praises to Allah who humiliated you, Ahlul Bayt. He was thinking she is a lady, she has gone through so much suffering, she will now break down and cry. Zainab stands against him and replies him and says, Alhamdulillahi alladhi akramana Ahlul Bayt wa tahharana tathira. All praises to Allah who honored us. Alhamdulillahi alladhi akramana bi Muhammadin sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa tahharana tathira. All praises to Allah who honored us with Muhammad and purified us thoroughly. It is you who are humiliated, for it is a fasiq who is humiliated, not us. To which Ibn Ziyad says to her, how do you find what Allah did to your brother? This was the Umayyad thought that there was absolutely no concept of free will. And they are the ones who introduced this disease in the minds of Muslims even today, that Allah is responsible for everything. There is no free will. So Allah is to blame for even the killing of Imam Hussein. This was started by the Bani Umayyah so that they would blame Allah for the killing of Imam Hussein. So he says to Zainab, how do you find what Allah did to your brother? How do you find? She replies him and says, it was not Allah who did it. Ma ra'aytu illa jamila. First and foremost, O Ibn Ziyad, I do not see anything but good for my brother and his companions. Because this was their time to die. They were destined to have died on this day. If they would not have been killed, they would have left their homes and come to Karbala on that day and passed away. But Allah honored them with martyrdom. Whereas you, who are the fasiqeen, are the ones who are humiliated. And then we are told in the books of riwayah, as there was a commotion amongst people, look at the power and the strength of this lady. She says, فَأَوْمَتْ بِيَدَيْهَا, with her finger. She just pointed to the crowd. They became silent, absolutely silent. He says you could hear people breathing. She began addressing them. Ya Ahl al-Kufa, shame on you, O people of Kufa. She spoke to them with such force, saying to them, do you know whose blood you have spilled? Do you know how you have hurt the Prophet? Do you know what you have done to the daughter of the Prophet? And as she spoke to them and said, they began crying. And as they cried, she said to them, Atabkun, are you crying now? Ay wallah, yes by Allah, cry. فَلْتَبْكُوا كَثِيرًا وَلْتَضْحَكُوا قَلِيلًا. You should cry more and laugh less, for you have destroyed your hereafter by killing the grandson of the Prophet. And she spoke with such force that the riwayat I have read, it said that the men were trying to stop themselves from crying. Some of them put their hands in their mouth and they began biting their hands to stop themselves from crying. This is the force she spoke with. And some of them who could not see who was speaking, they began asking each other, has the day of judgment come? Because by Allah we can hear Ali bin Abi Talib speaking from the mimbar of Kufa. Allah gave Zainab the ability to speak like her father. She was inspired by her father. She addressed Yazid in court. This is like addressing the president or the prime minister of a country in the parliament while he is sitting with all his people in full control. She is a prisoner. She addresses him and says, Yabnat tulaqa, sons of freed slaves. For your grandfather Abu Sufyan was a slave of my grandfather on the day of Fatah Makkah. It is my grandfather who freed you slaves. It is no mean feat that she speaks with such force. But she did not let the enemy have the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Even to the day of Ashura, we are told that after Imam Hussein alayhi salam had been martyred, the books of history record that they saw an eminent lady leaving the tents. This is before the tents were burnt. They saw Zainab coming out of the tent. She came out to the battlefield. She realized that now she must become Hussein. She has already taken on the role of Hussein. Up until now, everybody who went to fight Hussein was bringing the horses and giving them and mounting them. When Hussein left and he looked to the right and he looked to the left and there was no one to help him mount the horse, and he began asking, "O Habib, O Abbas, Mali unadikum fala tujibuni. Why is it that I am calling you but no one is replying me?" It was Zainab, wasn't it, who came to Hussein and said, "My dear brother, if Abbas is not there, I will mount you on the horse." So now Zainab has seen that when Habib felt, Hussein ran to the battlefield. He said, "Rabbana taqabbal minna hadha al-qurban." When Abbas felt, it was Hussein who raised the hands of Abbas and said, "Allahumma taqabbal minna hadha al-qurban." When Ali al-Akbar fell, it was Hussein who ran and said, "Oh Allah, accept this sacrifice from us." When Ali al-Asghar's throat was pierced, it was Hussein who raised and said, "Oh Allah, accept this little sacrifice from me." Now Hussein has fallen, there is no one to offer him as a sacrifice. The enemies say, we saw Zainab coming out to the battlefield. She was not crying in front of the enemies were crying. She came out to the battlefield. She saw the body of her brother whose head had been severed. She put her hands under the mutilated body of her brother Hussein. She tried lifting it a little bit. Then she looked to the heavens and said, "Allahumma taqabbal minna hadha al-qurban." Oh Allah, accept this sacrifice from us, Ahlul Bayt. In other words, the sunnah of Hussein was finished with Zainab. This is Ummul Masa'ib, my dear brothers and sisters. From the time she was a little girl, she lost her grandfather, she saw that sorrow, she took that on her heart. Then she saw her mother's ribs being crushed, she took that on her heart. She saw her brother being miscarried, Mohsin, she took that on her heart. One poet says that Zainab saw two tashts in her life. One tasht she saw was that of Hassan, in which after he had been poisoned, he began to vomit pieces of his liver onto a tray, onto a tasht. The other tasht she saw was in the darbar of Yazid when she saw the head of her brother on a tasht. This is al-Masa'ib. She continues to take the suffering into her as she comes towards Karbala. Now when we come to Karbala, we are told that she had one particular quality. Zainab had this one particular quality in her. This quality was that whenever something was given to her, she always kept a little bit aside so that if anyone else needed it, they would not run out of it. And the people and the women and the children had this habit. They realized that if you ever run out of anything and you can't find it from anyone, go to Amma Zainab, she will always have it. Now on the day of Ashura, when water ran out, we are told that people began thinking, if nobody has water, Amma Zainab has saved some water. Sakina bint al-Hussein, the daughter of Imam Hussein, reports, she says, I decided that Amma Zainab will always have water, I will go and ask for a sip of water from her. She says, when I came to the tent of my aunt Zainab, she was holding my little brother Ali al-Asghar. His tongue was outside in thirst. She was standing and sitting with the little baby. I felt ashamed that I cannot ask for water. She says, Zainab said to me, Sakina, come, what is it you want? She said, I was going to ask you for water, but I see my brother is in greater need than I am. Maybe we can go and ask others. Now Sakina bint al-Hussein says that my aunt Zainab said to me, it is unlikely anyone else will have water, but let us go and ask. They began going from tent to tent, asking everyone if they had water. Sakina bint al-Hussein says, by the time my aunt Zainab came back to her tent, there were 20 young children, boys and girls, holding on to her dress, following her, saying, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. Ammat Zainab, Al-Atash, Al-Atash. She became the person that people were turning to. Why? Because she is al-Masa'ib. Ajrukum ala Allah. In another example, we are told that after the day of Ashura had passed away, the night that came after that we called Shami Ghariba. The children had run in all directions after the tent was set in fire. Some ran towards the battlefield. Some ran towards the Furat. Some ran towards their mother's laps. In all that confusion, Zainab went out with her sister to gather all the children. When she had gathered them all together, they were completely disoriented and confused. They had no idea what has just happened. A few hours ago, all their loved ones were alive. Now we are told that all the children began looking at Zainab. Everyone began saying to her, Amma Zainab, ayna abi? Another child is calling, Ammati Zainab, wain akhi, Ammati Zainab, wain ammi. Everyone is asking Zainab, where is my father? Zainab, where is my brother? Zainab, where is my uncle? And she became this person who had to console every one of them. Not only the children, but even Hussein himself, Zainab was the one taking masa'ib from him. Allama Majlisi says that when Ali al-Akbar fell from his horse and he called out for the last time to his father and said, Ya abata alayka minni salam, he says that because Zainab knew that Ali al-Akbar's sorrow was too much for her brother Hussein to carry, she ran out of the tent before him. Allama Majlisi says that when Hussein came to the body of Ali al-Akbar, he found Zainab had already reached him before she had reached. And it is because of her he was distracted from his son and he took her back to the Khayyam. So Zainab continues to take this from her brother. Ajrukum ala Allah. We are told that when Hussein was on his last moments, now here there are two narrations. One narration says that Zainab came out from the Khayma. She came to an elevated place that is called Tilla Zainabiyya. She stood from there only and watched her brother being killed. She called out and said, Oh Umar Asad, are you watching while my brother is being killed? But there is another narration that says Zainab went out to the battlefield. She came to a body that was in prostration. She could not recognize at first if this was her brother. She began saying, are you my brother Hussein? Anta Noora Basari? Are you the light of my eyes? Are you the son of Zahra? Are you the son of Muhammad? Are you the son of Ali? She says he was so weak, he just turned and looked at me. I realized this is my brother Hussein. I sat behind him. I lifted him towards me. I supported his back. He began whispering to me. The first thing he said to me is, Zainab, why have you left the tents while I am still alive? Zainab, return to the Khayyam, your brother is still alive. Now Zainab says that when she was about to leave for the last time her brother, he said something to her. He said to her, Ukhayya, hal min jur'atin min al-ma. My sister, even as you go, is it possible to get a sip of water anymore? فَبِحَقِّ جَدِّ رَسُولُ اللَّهِ أَنَا عَطْشَانٍ. I swear by my grandfather Rasulullah, I am really, really thirsty. You see that this masa'ib is also being taken by Zainab. I would say, oh Hussein, while you are drinking gulps of patience and gulps of thirst, Zainab is drinking gulps of misfortunes and masa'ib in her. My dear brothers and sisters, I wish to end with a few verses of Mir Anis in Urdu, which will show you this capacity of the lady to take this suffering. This is the wasiyah that Mir Anis captures, in which Hussein alayhi salam is giving this wasiyah to his sister Zainab for the last time. That, oh Zainab, what sort of masaib I need you to carry within you after myself. Now these are the words of Mir Anis. He says, Rehm khakar koi berham agar pani de. Rehm khakar agar koi berham pani de. Pehle tum meri sakina ko pilana Zainab. Zainab, if you get any water after me, remember the first person to be given water is my sakina. Agar sakina meri roye, to tum tusalli dena. Uske aage na kabhi aansu bahana Zainab. Zainab, if my sakina cries, you console her. But oh Zainab, carry this within you also. Do not cry in front of my sakina. Ran ko mein jaake na maidan se firaunga, qaid tum hoke meri laash pe na aana Zainab. Meri laash ko kafan na muyassar hoye. Apni chadar ka kafan humko banana Zainab. Zainab, if they take my clothes away after my passing away. Zainab, if there is no shroud for me left, Zainab, use your chadar and make a shroud for me. Gar sakina ka labe nehr guzar ho jaye. Gar sakina ka labe nehr guzar ho jaye. Lash Abba se dilawar ko chupana Zainab. Zainab, if my sakina wanders and goes towards the Furat. Zainab, hide the body of Abba. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أيام القلب.